In the years following World War II, a new generation of Black Americans rose to challenge the deep and persistent racial injustices that had plagued the United States since the end of the Civil War. The struggle for civil rights, once crushed in the aftermath of Reconstruction, reawakened with new energy and focus. Across courtrooms, classrooms, churches, and buses, Black Americans demanded an end to segregation, discrimination, and inequality. In today's video, we're going to explore the renewed struggle for civil rights in the 1950s, how legal battles, grassroots activism, and the brutal realities of racial violence brought civil rights to the center of American political life. Let's get started. Since Reconstruction, Black Americans, especially in the South, faced widespread discrimination enforced by Jim Crow laws. These laws not only segregated public facilities, but also ensured that white Southerners maintained economic, political, and social control over Black Americans. Even outside the South, discrimination persisted. In the North, redlining policies kept Black families in poor neighborhoods, and Black workers were often confined to the lowest paying jobs. Segregation may have been less visible in northern cities, but the effects were no less damaging. After World War II, with the nation's attention on freedom and democracy abroad, many Black Americans renewed their calls for those same rights at home. The courts became a crucial battleground in the fight for equality. In 1953, President Dwight D. Eisenhower appointed Earl Warren as Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. During his tenure through 1969, the Warren Court issued a series of landmark decisions that reshaped American life, especially in the area of civil rights. In 1954, the court ruled on Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, a case that combined multiple lawsuits challenging school segregation in states like Kansas, South Carolina, Virginia, and others. The case was named for Oliver Brown, whose daughter Linda Brown had been denied admission to an all white school near their home. The Supreme Court unanimously overturned the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson decision, which had upheld the constitutionality of separate but equal facilities. Writing for the court, Chief Justice Warren declared, "In the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal." Despite the ruling, President Eisenhower refused to enforce the decision aggressively. Privately, he even lamented appointing Warren and believed the ruling would set progress back in the South by 15 years. Though Brown versus the Board was a monumental legal victory, implementation was slow and met with massive resistance. In 1956, 101 members of Congress signed the Southern Manifesto, denouncing the court's decision as a clear abuse of federal power. By the fall of 1957, fewer than a quarter of the school districts that were affected by the ruling had begun integrating. The crisis came to a head in Little Rock, Arkansas, where Governor Orville Faubus ordered the state's National Guard to block 9 Black students, famously known as the Little Rock Nine, from entering Central High School. On September 23, 1957, as news cameras rolled, an angry white mob of over 1,000 gathered outside the school. Eisenhower, reluctant but constitutionally obligated, took control of the Arkansas National Guard and sent federal troops to enforce integration. Despite continued resistance, including Faubus closing all city high schools the following year, Central High graduated its first integrated class in 1959. Segregation in the South extended far beyond schools. It defined every aspect of public life: buses, trains, restrooms, drinking fountains, lunch counters, and more. But by the mid 1950s, Black Americans were no longer willing to wait for change through the courts alone. On March 2nd, 1955, Claudette Colvin, a 15-year-old student at Booker T. Washington High School in Montgomery, Alabama, refused to give up her bus seat to a white passenger. Arrested and forcibly removed from the bus, she later said, "History kept me stuck in my seat. I felt the hand of Harriet Tubman pushing down on one shoulder and Sojourner Truth pushing down on the other." 9 months later, on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks, a local NAACP secretary, also refused to give up her seat and was arrested. Her quiet act of defiance sparked the Montgomery bus boycott. Led by a young Baptist minister by the name of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Black community organized a citywide boycott of public buses. Inspired by the nonviolence of Gandhi and the philosophy of civil disobedience from Henry David Thoreau, King's leadership inspired many. "We must use the weapon of love," he declared. The boycott lasted 381 days. Black residents walked, carpooled, or hitchhiked rather than use segregated buses. White leaders resisted, but ultimately, in Browder v. Gale, a case in which Claudette Colvin was a plaintiff, the Supreme Court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional. To maintain the momentum of the movement, King and others formed the Southern Leadership Conference in 1957. Soon after, King found a bomb on his front porch, a chilling reminder of the dangers ahead. Progress wasn't limited to the courts and local actions. At the federal level, President Harry Truman issued Executive Order 9981 in 1948, ending racial segregation in the U.S. military, a bold and historic move. Congress followed with the Civil Rights Act of 1957, the first since Reconstruction. The law created a Civil Rights Commission and a new division within the Justice Department to protect voting rights. However, enforcement was terribly weak, and by 1959, the law had not added a single black voter to the rolls in the South. Southern senators fought back with a tactic known as the filibuster, speaking for hours to block civil rights legislation. Ending a filibuster required a vote for cloture, making civil rights laws difficult to pass without overwhelming support. If any one event exposed the brutality of racism in the South to the rest of the country, it was the horrific lynching of Emmett Till. In August of 1955, 14-year-old Emmett Till, a black teenager from Chicago, visited relatives in Mississippi. He allegedly whistled at a white woman in a grocery store, a claim the woman later recanted. Days later, the store owner, Roy Bryant, and husband of the cashier, and his half-brother, J.W. Milam, abducted Till at gunpoint. They beat him mercilessly, gouged out his eye, shot him, and tied his body to a cotton gin fan with barbed wire before dumping him into a river. When his body was recovered, it was unrecognizable, identified only by the ring on his finger. His mother, Mamie Till, insisted on having an open casket funeral. Tens of thousands came to see the damage inflicted on her son. Photographs of Till's mutilated body published in Jet magazine and the Chicago Defender shocked the nation and became a rallying cry for the civil rights movement. Despite overwhelming evidence, an all-white jury acquitted Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam. Protected from double jeopardy, they admitted to the murder in a paid interview with Look magazine, where they gave every gruesome detail of what they did to Emmett Till. The 1950s marked the beginning of a renewed, organized, and unstoppable civil rights movement in America. Through the courts, through nonviolent protest, and through the raw courage of everyday citizens, young and old, Black Americans pushed the nation to confront the promise of its founding ideals. But this was only the beginning. The decades ahead would bring more confrontation, more laws, more tragedy, and ultimately, more victories in the long journey toward justice and equality. The struggle was far from over, but the spark had been lit, and it would not be extinguished. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.